Hello everyone. I can see lots of people are just logging in right now, so I'll give it another minute before we start this. Okay, well, I can see lots of people are joining, but without further ado, let's kick it off. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about why a responsible sourcing strategy is so important to businesses with global supply chains. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we start. So everyone's mics are currently muted, and as there are quite a few of us on the call today, please do use the questions function on the sidebar to ask any questions you might want to ask. The webinar is going to run for approximately 30 minutes, and at the end there will be an opportunity for us to answer any questions that we haven't covered during the presentation. We'll be sharing a recording of this webinar with everyone in a follow-up email too. So just on that note, can I just check that everyone can hear me okay and see the presentation? If someone or anyone could just pop a message in the chat function, and I'll check that that's all working properly.
Yep.
Okay. I've not actually received anything in the chat though. Max, you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, let's just double check that the attendees can. If someone who's joined as a regular attendee could pop a message in. Great, okay, we've got a message there to say that it's working fine. So I shall continue. So a brief introduction then before we start. My name is Tom Sewell and I sit within the responsible sourcing team here at SEDEX. With me today is Max Levy, who is the Social and Human Rights Manager at SEDEX member Reckitt Benckiser. So what can you expect to hear about today? Well, in the next 10 minutes, I'll be running through an introduction to the topic. What do we mean by responsible sourcing? Why is it important? And what benefits can it bring? I'll then briefly introduce you to the key steps that SEDEX considers essential to an effective responsible sourcing strategy, before Max takes over and talks you through why this is so important to RB and how they have gone about implementing their program. And we should then have time to answer some of the questions that you've posted in the chat function as we're presenting. So just before we get stuck into today's webinar, we'd like to tell you a bit more about SEDEX if you're not already familiar with us. SEDEX is a membership organisation that provides one of the world's leading online platforms for companies to manage and improve working conditions in global supply chains. We provide practical tools, services, and a community network to help companies improve their responsible and sustainable business practices. We were founded over 16 years ago in the UK by retailers and their suppliers looking to reduce duplication and improve working conditions through a process of continuous improvement. Since then, we've been joined by tens of thousands of members operating in different sectors across the world who have a combined responsibility for the welfare of 33 million workers. We're probably most well known for our audit methodology, SMETA, the SEDEX members ethical trade audit, which is used widely by both SEDEX members and non-members throughout the world. So, what does responsible sourcing mean? What does it involve? And what are the benefits for a business? When we talk about responsible sourcing, we're talking about an approach to sourcing, an approach a business can take which protects the rights of workers and considers and tries to eliminate any harm it might inadvertently cause as a result of its activities. It requires an organisation to actively and consciously source and procure products and services in an ethical, sustainable and socially conscious way. SEDEX recommends that a responsible approach to sourcing is guided by established frameworks and principles, such as the International Labour Organization's Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, and the OECD Due Diligence Guidance for Responsible Business Conduct. These provide the international standards designed to protect workers and help businesses understand what steps they need to take to be confident they're operating responsibly. And in doing so, this can open the door to helping a company contribute to the realization of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. So why is it important to source responsibly? Well, businesses typically source products and services, both those that they sell and those that they use, from all over the world. In doing so, they have a responsibility to understand the impact their activities can have and to limit any negative impacts. This includes understanding the impact of suppliers' operations. We know that working conditions vary greatly across global supply chains, and that the complexity of global networks makes it extremely difficult for businesses to know everything that happens in their supply chain. However, there are a number of factors that we believe make responsible sourcing more important than ever. Firstly, consumers and investors alike are increasingly mindful of the sustainability credentials of companies. Companies that understand their impacts and manage these effectively can build trust in their brands and reach new customers. And to illustrate the point, a survey by market research analyst Nielsen revealed that 81% of global respondents felt strongly that companies should help improve the environment. The growth in ESG, that's environmental, social and governance investing, is also testament to this trend. And we're seeing coalitions of investors, such as the platform Living Wage Financials, which has over 2.6 trillion euros of assets under management, place a focus on specific issues such as the low wages that typically dominate most supply chains. Secondly, in recent years, we've seen a number of new laws being introduced around the world, designed to incentivize companies to take steps to ensure that their business and supply chains are free of the most severe human rights abuses. For example, the UK and subsequently Australia's Modern Slavery Acts, the Netherlands Child Labour Due Diligence Law, and the French Corporate Duty of Vigilance Law have all changed the way companies that operate in these countries do business. On the horizon, we have EU-wide legislation that will make human rights due diligence mandatory for companies operating in the EU internal market. By embracing the spirit of these regulations, by which I mean driving a race to the top rather than serving as tick box compliance exercises, companies have the power to improve standards around the world. Finally, we should all now be aware of the threat posed by global heating and climate breakdown. The continual degradation of the environment is putting our own survival at risk. The stakes couldn't be higher, and time is not on our side. With supply chain emissions on average over 5 times as high as a business's direct emissions, and just 4% of suppliers having renewable energy targets, according to CDP, companies have an essential role to play in reducing supply chain emissions and helping to turn the tide on our rapidly warming planet. The World Economic Forum is clear on the threat posed to businesses by environmental risks, in terms of both their likelihood and severity. Only infectious diseases, with the COVID-19 crisis, of course, at the forefront of everyone's minds, manages to compete with the risks of extreme weather, climate action failure, biodiversity loss, natural resources crises, and man-made environmental damage. We're already seeing how the changing climate is having an impact on people around the world, particularly in the global south. Extreme weather is affecting crop production, driving rural to urban migration, and further exacerbating risks such as debt bondage to vulnerable workers. And the focus is only going to continue to increase. In the past week alone, we've heard BlackRock's chief executive Larry Fink warning businesses that no issue ranks higher than climate change. And we've also seen the results of the largest survey of public opinion on climate change ever conducted. It found that 2/3 of people around the world now view climate change as a global emergency. So, aside from the fact that we all as individuals hopefully want to contribute to a healthy and more equitable planet, what are the tangible benefits for those businesses that take steps to source responsibly and with consideration to their social and environmental impact? The good news is that responsible practices can bring operational, reputational, and financial benefits too. Firstly, operating responsibly helps a company to meet or exceed the requirements set by laws. Failure to comply with these laws can result in heavy fines, imprisonment for company officials, or trade bans, like we're increasingly seeing from the US, with huge financial consequences for those companies. Secondly, business practices that exploit people or the environment are a huge reputational risk. Poor practices and mistreatment of workers can turn into international scandals, generating significant press coverage and deterring both consumers and investors. As the famous Warren Buffett quote goes, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it." Operating responsibly protects companies against these risks. Protecting workers and providing safe working conditions is also good for business performance, since it helps to reduce injury rates, absenteeism rates, employee turnover rates, and worker error rates, all of which cost the company. Academic research has shown that companies with robust sustainability practices demonstrate better operational performance, which ultimately translates into a benefit to the bottom line. Businesses can be powerful agents for good, with the jobs they create helping to lift people out of poverty, empower women, and change attitudes in gender relations throughout the world. They can improve workers' physical and mental well-being and can help to safeguard resources and ecosystems for the future. So at SEDEX, we have 9 key steps that we recommend businesses carefully consider as part of their responsible sourcing strategy. You can read about these in detail on sedex.com, and we'll include a link to the full article with more information about these steps after this webinar. The steps can be used as a guide to make sure you secure internal buy-in and collaboration, engage your supply chain, and work proactively to manage potential risks. And I'm pleased to say that the Social and Human Rights Manager, Max Levy, is now going to help bring a practical perspective to the discussion and talk us through why responsible sourcing is important to the company that he works for. Max, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand over to you to take you through your slides.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Tom. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many of you on the call from all different parts of the world. So today, like Tom said, I'm going to talk a bit more about RB's responsible sourcing strategy. For those of you who don't know who RB are, we're a FTSE 15 company headquartered here in the UK. Some of the brands that we own are Dettol, Durex, Nurofen, Finish, Vanish, Calgon, and many more. If we just go to the next slide, please, Tom. Thank you. So I want to start this presentation with a call to action. We're facing a social and environmental crisis globally. There's growing attention on social and environmental practices, in particular responsible sourcing and climate change. This results in increasing commitment to action at both national and international level. An example of this would be the Paris Agreement, just to name one of many. We're also seeing increased consumer, retailer, and investor pressure on businesses to play their part more. Examples that RB are seeing is we're now contributing to Amazon's climate pledge. Similarly, we're doing the same for Walmart and Asda through Project Gigaton. With investors, again, as Tom mentioned earlier, there's a real shift to ESG funds, so that's environmental social governance, and companies that have a responsible sourcing strategy are better placed to be invested in for this reason. Additionally, we're seeing a real shift in consumer demographics as well. So more millennials, more Generation X, Generation Y are now wanting to buy more purpose-led products and see what happens within the supply chain. You can see from this that inaction poses a material risk to business continuity. This could be due to reputational damage. Again, we've all seen on the front page of the newspaper times where this has happened, but then also especially around environmental, increased regulation, increased taxation, for example, carbon tax, waste, packaging disposal, etc. And it's really important for businesses to get ahead of the curve in this area by having a responsible sourcing strategy. Additionally, a number of the people on the call will have a global supply chain, and you'll be operating in a number of resource scarce areas, and it's important that we have supplier continuity in those areas. If you have the visibility of what's happening in your supply chain, you can proactively engage your suppliers and build capability so you can be close to any problems and solve them before it's flagged without you knowing. So the last message on this slide is I want everyone to think, are we all currently doing enough within our supply chain? Next slide, please, Tom. Thank you. So why is responsible sourcing so important for RB? There's no single business case for undertaking this work, but there are a number of factors that are encouraging, if not pushing, businesses to move in this direction. The first one is moral responsibility and license to operate. At RB, as well as using our brands as a vehicle to do goods and improve people's lives, we want to know that the people we employ, the communities we operate in, we're having a positive impact on their lives as well. So as a big company, we feel we've got a moral responsibility to get visibility in our supply chain, and understand what's happening. Number 2 is ensuring legal compliance. As we mentioned earlier on this presentation, there's increasing legislation for companies now to have transparency, to report on what's happening in their supply chains, such as the Modern Slavery Act. Again, it's very important to manage the reputational risk as well. And while some people in businesses and companies may not see moral responsibility or even legal compliance as a driving factor to have a responsible sourcing strategy, it's really important to manage your reputational risk as well. For example, again, if you see, we all know about the Rana Plaza, and we've recently seen other cases of companies who haven't known what's happening in their supply chain, be in the news, be in the newspapers, and this has a big impact on their share price, the people that buy their products, and also the companies that invest in them as well. Additionally, mitigating business continuity risk is a really important area of responsible sourcing. We want to understand what's happening in our supply chain, like I said earlier, but also something really interesting that we've seen at RB over the years is there's a direct correlation between the human rights performance and compliance levels of a supplier, and also the quality of the products as well. And we've seen this in both human rights audits and quality audits. For example, if a supplier is not paying minimum wage or has non-compliant working hours, obviously a lot of employees in those organizations will need to work much longer hours, work 2 or 3 jobs in order to feed themselves, their families, and make ends meet. Therefore, they'll be working longer hours, you'll have a more fatigued workforce, and you'll also see a much higher turnover of employees as well, which negatively impacts on the quality of the product as well. So as well as human rights and moral responsibility, we also see the quality of the products has a negative impact if you don't have a responsible sourcing strategy or you don't ensure that human rights are safeguarded in your supply chain. Next slide, please, Tom. Thanks. So we've spoken a bit about what RB are doing. We've spoken a bit about the problem that we're facing globally, but now I want to talk a bit about the challenges, both for companies and also for suppliers. RB, we've been a member of Sedex for a number of years now, and when we were starting on our journey, we had these problems to a bigger extent. Some of them we're still facing now. So number 1, it's important to get visibility of our supply chain and the labour practices further down. Number 2 is educating our suppliers and building supplier capabilities at scale. We've got tens of thousands of suppliers globally, and we really need to get visibility of where our suppliers are located, what the risk is, and understand which suppliers need help in certain areas. And it's not possible just to audit every single one of our suppliers. Additionally, we need to map out our supply chain in a consistent manner. But it's not just us who have challenges. There are also challenges for our suppliers too. One of the most frequent challenges that suppliers have is they're asked by multiple customers what they're doing in their manufacturing facilities and responsible sourcing. There'll be a small customer, for example, in Hyderabad in India, who are servicing 10, 15 big multinational companies. And what happened more previously, but to an extent now, is they're asked by all these different customers for different audits to complete different self-assessments. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the expertise, and they're already pulling people from very stretched teams from human rights, manufacturing, health and safety to complete all of these standards. And it leads to audit fatigue for the suppliers. Number 2, suppliers we find often need a quick, easy and scalable way of showing their improvement to customers, and again, reducing the duplication on the requests from all the suppliers. Number 3, we have suppliers who are all different maturity levels, and perhaps for those that are just starting out on their responsible sourcing journey, they may need a bit more guidance to help them start making the required progress. So we've been working, like I said, with Sedex for a number of years, and we found it's a great help for these. So just going back to the challenges from a company perspective, we asked all of our direct suppliers to join Sedex and to complete a self-assessment questionnaire. This gives us visibility of the manufacturing facilities, where they are, the number of employees, the breakdown of employees, so agency workers, migrant workers, even male and female, and that's really powerful for understanding what's happening in your supply chain. Number two, we use the self-assessment questionnaire as a way of educating our suppliers and building their capability as well. So rather than just not being completely clear on what we're expecting, we've got our policy for responsible sourcing for suppliers, but we also ask them all to complete the self-assessment questionnaire so they understand as well the different requirements that they should be completing. And again, it helps us map out our supply chain consistently as well. And what's really changed with Sedex recently compared to previous years is their reporting function as well that they've got on their platform. So we find that really useful. From a challenger for supplier perspective, because it's not just us at RB, it's a number of our peer companies asking suppliers to complete the self-assessment questionnaire and complete SMETA for pillar audits as well. They're seeing a big reduction in the amount of requests from their customers as well, which is very well received. Like I said, rather than doing 10, 15 different types of audits, different types of self-assessment questionnaires, that's been drastically reduced, and they can actually invest time in improvements rather than reporting. Again, through the ongoing reporting cycles, completing an SAQ every couple of years, having more audits, they can then demonstrate the progress that they've made as a site to a number of their customers. Finally, for those who are just starting out and aren't quite as mature on their responsible sourcing journey, Sedex has got a variety of resources that really help our customers move the needle in their responsible sourcing journey. Next slide, please. Thank you. So next, I really want to talk about our partnerships in RB and how we really use our partnerships, both internal and external, to support our responsible sourcing strategy. So RB's vision for our human rights and responsible business program is to positively enhance human rights and responsible business practices across our entire value chain. And we do this in three main ways. So number one is through internal partnerships, working in cross-functional teams within RB to co-create our responsible sourcing strategy and ensure that the business is aligned with helping deliver our responsible sourcing goals. So as you know, I'm in the sustainability team at RB, but outside of the sustainability team, I work very, very closely with procurement, because at RB, it's the procurement team who've got the relationship with a lot of our suppliers. So by co-creating our strategy with them, they really help us roll it out and deliver it. For example, we've now integrated responsible sourcing into supplier scorecards. So when the procurement teams are having their half yearly or their annual reviews with suppliers, they'll be asking them about their responsible sourcing. They'll be asking a number of them about their environmental and climate change progress as well, which is really important. Additionally, what's very interesting is yesterday I got an email from the new Chief Supply Officer at RB, and he wanted to know a bit more about our responsible sourcing program, and for a certain stream of it, what the involvement of procurement is and what they need from us. And what was really good there is because before he joined, we then co-created that with the procurement teams. It's already really embedded in that. So for us, internal partnerships are really, really important in delivering our responsible sourcing ambition. Number two is external partnerships. And this is about fostering collaborative relationships and proactively engaging with key external stakeholders to improve the effectiveness of our approach to ensuring that human rights and social impact across our entire value chain are respected. So as you know, we work very closely with Sedex. We're also very active members in AIM Progress. We recently joined the Consumer Goods Forum. We've got a partnership with the Danish Institute of Human Rights. We've also joined the PSCI as well recently, so the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. So these external partnerships is really, really important for us to positively enhance human rights and responsible businesses across our value chain. And we really see a lot of value in collaboration, both internally and externally, and taking our program to the next level. Additionally, as well, brand with purpose. So we've got a great portfolio of brands here at RB, which are really intrinsic to helping people and are aligned with our compass as a business as well. So as a result, with these brands, we can then adopt a more holistic view of social impact and human rights across our entire value chain and really embed that into brands. An example in recent times is we partnered with National Geographic in Turkey and a couple of other water scarce countries and Finnish, and we ran a campaign there about how avoiding the pre-rinse function on your dishwasher for each household can save a huge amount of water every year. And then we roll that into regional, country level, and that's really, really impactful. Next slide, please, Tom. Thank you. You'll recognize this slide from what Tom spoke about recently, but what I wanted to do is talk to you a little bit in the last slide about how RB have done this, and hopefully it will bring it to life a bit more for you. So like I said, we're quite a few years into our responsible sourcing journey. So what we did initially was we defined commitment. We spoke to the leadership of RB and we told them what we should be doing, why we should be doing it, and what the benefits are. And like I said, that was the four boxes that I took you through earlier. Once we'd aligned that, we built internal awareness at all levels of the organization. So we did this through collaborating with other teams, through town halls, and generally raising awareness. Once we've done that, we had certain standards that we expect of our own sites and suppliers. So we communicated that to the RB sites, and then we communicated that to suppliers as well. If you don't communicate your standards or your expectations to suppliers, then they don't know what they need to do. They don't know what expectations they need to meet. And in a lot of cases, we've actually built this into the contract as well. Once we've done that, we obviously map our supply chain. And once we've mapped our supply chain, we adopt a risk management approach. So we overlay a lens of risk onto our supply chain. As I said earlier, we need to take very much a risk-based approach. We've got tens of thousands of suppliers, and we can't go to each site and audit each site. So we'll ask all of our direct suppliers to join SEDEX and complete a self-assessment questionnaire. And then selected suppliers in high-risk regions, we'll ask them to conduct an audit. Once we've done that, we look at the audit findings, we look at the risk assessment findings, and we support our suppliers in remediating those negative impacts. Once we do that, we review the business practices, we review the groups of non-compliances and understand where the salient issues are and further support our suppliers in those regions. And then, of course, we monitor and report both internally and externally on our business, on our supply chain, and on our progress. So that's the final slide from me. I'll let Tom take over the final slide, but if you've got any questions, please do put them in the box. And if you've got anything you want to reach out to me, even after this, feel free to drop me an email or reach out on LinkedIn as well. Tom, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Max. Yeah, as Max said, we'll shortly be opening it up to questions. So if you can pop those into the chat now, and then we'll take those in a couple of minutes. But just to really wrap up the presentation and before we open up to those questions, I'd like to just briefly outline the general framework that SEDEX provides to help our members' responsible sourcing programs, and Max obviously talked to many of these points. So through our online platform, suppliers can complete a questionnaire that they can share with multiple customers, sharing data about the composition of their workforce, as well as the systems they have in place to manage labour standards and environmental risks. Then our comprehensive risk assessment tool, Radar, helps our members to segment their suppliers into higher or lower risk categories so that they can then use their resources most effectively. Any ethical audits that take place at a facility or a farm can be uploaded onto our platform by a supplier and shared with their customers, helping to reduce audit fatigue and allowing suppliers to understand where improvements are needed to meet international labour standards. We also have reporting tools, as Max mentioned, that really help our members to manage their compliance programs effectively and efficiently, as well as using the data to analyse trends over time and highlight any particular areas of concern. And finally, we have a suite of e-learning modules that can help suppliers to understand how to make improvements that benefit workers and their businesses. And in addition to our core products, it's just worth saying that we also do have a variety of additional services to really help you as a member get the most out of our platform. And the most important one is probably our dedicated account managers who would help you to understand which of those services would best suit your needs. So I'm just going to pause there as we've got time for some questions, and I'll take a look at the chat function and ask some of those. Bear with me one moment. Alex, hello. You said are we going to share the presentation? Yes, we are. It will go to everyone who has joined the session or registered for it. Mark, we've got a few questions from you. One of them for you, Max, was about managing external relationships. It says, how do you ensure that real partnerships occur and not just a tick box exercise, e.g. declarations, evidence, etc. So Mark, I'm guessing you're kind of referring to perhaps relationships with suppliers. So I don't know, Max, if you've got any advice about how RB kind of manages those relationships with suppliers and builds up that level of trust, I think, to answer that question.
Sure, absolutely. Very good question. So what we do is we work very collaboratively with a number of our suppliers in this space, whether it's human rights, responsible sourcing, environmental and climate. So it's agree with you, Mark. It's important that you move away from a tick box exercise. So for example, with our human rights, we've been working with a number of our key suppliers for several years now. And we understand it's not a light switch to compliance. It's in some cases a very gradual process. So what we do is we work very closely with those suppliers. Often our internal human rights team will support some of these suppliers as well on their journey. Another example would be on our environmental side as well. So we've recently launched an environmental project as well, which really is supporting our key suppliers move from basic compliance to performance improvement. And what we've done is we've worked with a couple of external companies on developing a suite of tools for our key suppliers to understand, build their own internal capability and really turn the needle on their improvement as well. So I think it's not just a quick fix, it's fairly long commitment, working very closely with our suppliers and external suppliers, partners as well, and really monitoring progress and seeing the impact that you're having.
Great, thanks, Max. I'll move on to another question. It's quite a specific question, but I'll ask it anyway. So we've been asked whether RB, when you look at the non-compliances that come back through the platform, in terms of critical, major, minor non-compliances, are you using your own kind of code of conduct to determine what's a critical issue, or are you basing it on kind of the standard criticalities? And I guess maybe, Mark, if you could clarify what you might be getting at here is whether you know, you're looking for an aligned approach, Max, or if you've kind of doing things your own way. There's certain things that are priorities for RB.
Very good question again. So it's a bit of both, to be honest. So we do internally have our own scoring, but that is one of the main things that feeds into that is the suite of SEDEX issue titles and the criticality level of them as well. So yeah, we do, some are higher priority for us, and we've reflected that in our internal reporting, but we do use the SEDEX critical, major, minor, and then yeah, the issue titles as well, really as a foundation for that scoring.
Great. I'm going to ask a question actually to Max. So just in terms of helping any listeners to focus their resources and efforts most efficiently, is there anything that you can share that RB has spent time on that perhaps didn't really work out and could help people to avoid it? Or, you know, on the flip side, is there anything that you found worked really well and you wish you'd done that sooner?
Yeah, sure. So I think kind of prioritization is really important, of course. So you'll have different suppliers all spread out over the world, and you can't focus, you can't do the same approach on all of them. It's not fair on the suppliers to treat them all the same, and also from a workload, from an RB perspective, from a sustainability, from a procurement perspective, it's not possible. So you really need to take a risk-based approach, and that's something we've been doing for a number of years. What we've done more recently within certain supplier groups is we've further segmented that. So based on spend, risk of the region, criticality for RB as a supplier as well. So that's something that I think it's very important that you should segment your suppliers and apply a risk-based approach. Something else that we've been doing for a number of years now, which is really good, is building capability with our suppliers as well. So instead of just doing audits, we do site visits as well, which is RB internal team. And yeah, we really coach, we really help our suppliers in improving certain areas that they're struggling with. So I think, yeah, that's one thing that we've been doing that's, I guess, worked very well, and something that we've recently started doing in the last kind of 2 or 3 years, that we will be doing more of going forward.
Great. I'm getting some really great questions coming through actually, and I don't think we're going to have time to answer them all, but I'll try and pick and choose them, and then perhaps we can respond to the other ones offline. Paul asked, Max, has RB had to accept an overall increase in total sourcing costs to achieve ethical sourcing? And then we had another question as well that asked about whether you needed to engage senior leaders within RB to make the case for responsible sourcing, or was it something that was kind of, I guess I'm adding to the question, was it driven from the top, or was it driven kind of from the sustainability team upwards, and then it got brought into? So I'll leave those 2 questions with you.
Okay, great. So I'll pick up the second one first. So what's really pleasantly surprised me since I've been at RB is how receptive a lot of the senior leadership team are to responsible sourcing, and it actually feels quite often like I'm pushing against an open door rather than pushing against a closed one. So that's something that's good. I think often we will work with the senior leadership teams to build a case around it, but generally they're pretty receptive to it and they understand the importance of it. If that answers the second question. The first question, am I correct in saying that it was if we've seen an increase in our sourcing costs through this program?
Yeah, exactly. To achieve the kind of ethical standards that you require, have you seen an increase in your sourcing costs? And I guess as well that kind of really talks to a quote that I saw recently actually from, let me just have a look, from David Pettit at RB. And I guess he was quoted as saying, this talks to really the purchasing practices that are employed, and he was quoted as saying, if we expect suppliers to comply with working hours, that's quite challenging if our planning isn't consistent, our lead times are short, and we expect our suppliers to meet our demands fairly quickly. So I guess that kind of seems obvious on the face of it, but as we know, many companies, you know, there is a disconnect between the requirements of the sustainability team to meet certain standards and then the actual purchasing practices that can make it difficult for suppliers to meet those standards. So yeah, I mean, how has RB kind of managed that process? It sounds from that quote like you're quite engaged on the topic, and are you seeing extra costs as a result of ensuring your suppliers meet those standards?
Yeah, so it's a journey, right? So I think perhaps in the short term we might see a slight increase in costs from a supplier level, but I think in the long run actually it's an investment, right? Because the suppliers that we have who are complying to this will often be, like I said, better suppliers from a quality perspective, and across the scorecard, suppliers that are compliant from human rights, from an environmental perspective, number one, are more resilient suppliers, so you have a more resilient supply chain, but number two, your suppliers that perform better in this space generally perform better across the board. Like you said, Tom, we are working with cross-functionally with procurement, with planning, to make sure that we are supporting suppliers. We're trying to give them kind of longer lead times, because if we're saying to our suppliers, you need to comply with working hours, and then on the flip side we're saying, and we need X thousand amount more units of Dettol, but by next week, we're kind of giving with one hand and taking with the other. So it's really important that we're consistent, and this piece of work that you were talking about with David, we've actually reached out to a number of our suppliers to get feedback from them, what they think about our buying practices and our procurement practices. And David spoke at a SIPS breakfast brief a couple of weeks ago about that, and we did it with about 60 suppliers last year, and we'll be rolling it out to more suppliers this year, because the insights that we got from that were really, really interesting.
Great. Next question. So Lauren asked how did RB develop its risk assessment scoring process? Did you partner with someone? Did you follow stakeholder group guidance, etc.? So I guess, yeah, I mean, this I think refers to the point really about, you mentioned that you know, key to kind of starting off this process is undergoing that risk assessment, and if you've got thousands of suppliers, you can't kind of immediately follow up with all of them. So I guess, yeah, going into a little bit more detail around how you manage that risk assessment process, and you know, what kind of sources of data do you use to understand which regions are high risk, and are there any particular areas that you focus on to understand that risk?
Sure. So we started this a few years ago, and SEDEX will have some resources on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom. But what we've done in more recent times, as our program has evolved, is we've also spoken to external companies, external partners about more country level risk. So we have both country level risk indicators, intrinsic risk for a country as well, but then also supplier type as well. So some supplier types will be much more high risk than others. So for example, your outsourced manufacturing facilities, so co-packers, could be quite high risk. We've recently expanded our responsible sourcing program now to encompass raw materials and packaging materials. And then also last year we ran a pilot on non-production spend as well. So we pulled data from a number of resources to create kind of a risk mapping matrix, but SEDEX has got that. Also, what's quite good that we found is when suppliers will complete a self-assessment questionnaire, risk scores will come through that, and I believe it's on Radar. Again, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but that Radar assessment will look at the intrinsic risk of a supplier, but then they'll also look at some of the responses as well and have a management control risk. So you get two risks on the Radar tool. So there are a variety of resources where you can pull information to get your risk assessment, and we did use our SEDEX and a few other sources as well, but it's evolved throughout the years.
Yeah, that is that's exactly right, Max. So yeah, within our Radar tool, we draw on the information that a supplier provides about the within their SAQ, and also really importantly, the information about the composition of their workforce, so that we can understand whether there might be, you know, a high proportion of female workers or migrant workers, and then we combine that information along with the country risk information, the sector that they're operating in, and also the systems that they have in place within the site to manage their risks, and provide that risk score to our members, exactly as you said, so you can begin to segment your suppliers into those that are higher and lower risk. Just let me check on the time. We've got 2 minutes here, so I'll just ask one more question. Diana asked about actually kind of that initial stage of mapping the supply chain. Max, have you got any kind of advice to people about how they could get started? You know, if this is very, very early on in the process and they've got a list of suppliers, how do they go about, you know, actually doing that mapping exercise? Where should they focus their attention? Have you got any practical experience or advice you can give on that?
Yeah, so good question. So I would say number one, work out initially what suppliers you're mapping. So like I said, is it going to be your whole supply chain, which I'm sure will be quite a beast to do? Maybe it will be initially tier 1 suppliers, so co-packers, distribution centers, embellishers before raw and pack. You want to work with your purchasing teams as well. So because you could do that mapping, that scoping at the start of the year, but then in the next 3 months and the next year, a number more suppliers will be onboarded by your procurement teams. So what you want to do is you want to make sure there's a process in place that you're getting visibility of new suppliers as well. I think once you've got that, like I said, we've asked our suppliers, all direct suppliers, to sign up to SEDEX and complete the self-assessment questionnaire for a few reasons. Number one, because it's a good educational tool for them. Number two, it gives us consistent visibility of our supply chain and our risk. But again, what's really useful about this is that once they've completed the self-assessment questionnaire, it will flag high-risk suppliers for you, and you'll get information about those specific suppliers. So like I said, how many migrant workers they've got on site, how many male, how many female workers, etc. So yeah, I'd say be clear on what part of your supply chain you want to map, how much of it, what supplier types, and then also just make sure that there's a process in place for onboarding suppliers so your list stays up to date, so you're not recutting it every year.
Awesome. Well, on that great plug for Sedex, I'll wrap it up there as we're out of time now. I'm really sorry I didn't get to respond to all of the questions, so we'll take those that we didn't answer today and make sure they get responded to. If you do want to know any more about joining Sedex, there's an email there on the screen that you can see. I did get a few more questions about whether we'll be sharing the presentation. So yes, just to reiterate, a copy of the presentation will be sent out to everyone who registered for it. So I hope you found that useful, and that concludes today's webinar. So and thanks, Max, of course, for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers.